Welcome to the Reel Rematch, the podcast where we unpack Hollywood's twin films, sometimes cloned on purpose, sometimes by accident, but always in competition. Today's matchup, It's a Beautiful Day for a Biopic, Won't You Be My Neighbour versus A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Two Fred Rogers stories released just 1 year apart. One a Sundance-born documentary love letter, the other a prestige drama built around a journalist's encounter with the man behind the cardigan. Which one captures the real Rogers best? Which one hits harder emotionally? And which neighbourhood story still feels like the version we'll be talking about decades from now?
Alrighty, here we go again for another episode. Justin, how are you going?
Jeff, I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good. Looking forward to today's pod because it's a bit of a different one for you and I. And in order to do that, we've invited a special guest to come and join us.
Yeah, Matt Greene, welcome to the Reel Rematch. Pleasure to have you. Matt and I connected through Letterboxd and our love of twin films. Matt, and you also chose the episode today. Thank you for that. Please provide just a sort of like a small intro.
Yeah. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me, Justin, Jeff, Ben. Thank you guys so much for having me. Justin reached out to me through Letterboxd. I had created not that long ago a giant, ever-expanding list of twin films through history. Actually, I was telling them before with the intention of doing a podcast one day. And then Justin reached out and was like, hey, we do a podcast on twin films. And I was like, oh, okay, well, great. Then I don't have to do the work. So he graciously reached out, asked if I'd be interested in guesting. And man, I was so excited. He sent me a list and this is what we landed on. I don't want to be the one that burst the bubble on what we're talking about. But yeah, I'm very excited to be here, and I really appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to have you here. And again, thank you for joining. And Jeff, please, without further delay, what films are we discussing today?
Well, we're looking at, as always, our twin films to do with Mr. Fred Rogers, very well-known and respected children's entertainer. I mean, entertainer is probably not the word. Children's television host and entertainer in the US. So we're going to be looking at the film A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood from 2019, and then the documentary on Fred Rogers called Won't You Be My Neighbor that came out the year earlier in 2018. So really interested to dive into these because as we were just discussing prior to record, being from Australia, obviously we're aware of Mr. Rogers and who he is, but we probably can't fully appreciate the total cultural impact given that he was, we don't have anything that's kind of the equivalent here in Australia. So it was really interesting for me to get into both of these films, not just from the dramatic side to see the interaction and Tom Hanks, who I believe does an exceptional job of being Mr. Rogers, but then also the documentary, which dives into his history and his legacy and exactly who he was and what he delivered. And it was really interesting for me to see that and get a better understanding of who the man is and what he actually gave to these generations of American children.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And that is a really important data point in terms of we've got no comparable to Fred Rogers. In Australia, I would say really the cornerstone of the seminal children's TV program show was Play School. But Play School, Matt, for your benefit, is a cousin of Sesame Street, right? It's on that corner. What Fred Rogers was doing, was really him being on a mission, right? And part of that is obviously really a mission from God with, him being an ordained Presbyterian minister. And I think them discharging him with a remit to continue the amazing work that he was doing when he was ordained, I think back in 1963. And this, I mean, he really was an amazing driven person, who wanted to equip children with a toolkit to help them, control and modulate their emotions, and use that show as a platform to help demystify the fears, uncertainties, and doubts that they would have as they, grow from really little people to be it sort of like young and middle child to that pathway to adulthood. And we've really had nothing like it. And I think intellectually and otherwise, you can start to project how important that was and otherwise. But given the fact that, you lived and breathed it, as did, friends, family, relatives, and otherwise, we would really love for you to share, the impact and the interactions and the memories that you have of, Fred Rogers, and in particular, his program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Yeah. So in America, I remember growing up, obviously most of this is going to be anecdotal, but this is my experience as a kid who grew up in America in the 80s, mostly 90s, is that PBS had Sesame Street and then Mr. Rogers, I think in that order. And we would have other channels. There was Nickelodeon and there was Disney Channel, but even all those, like even as a kid, there were certain things that, your parents didn't want you to watch because they weren't wholesome. PBS was always safe. So we were always watching that. So I grew up with Mr. Rogers on, maybe not daily, but certainly weekly, probably multiple times a week. And as a kid, I remember recognizing this is different. This is a guy who has no problem slowing down, has no problem with quiet. And I don't think until I saw these movies, I saw both these movies back when they came out. I rewatched them for this, but when they came out, I don't think it was until then that I realized how what's the word? He was very intentional, very progressive's not the right word. He was not afraid to tackle hard subjects with kids, and how rare that feels. And he did it with kindness. It wasn't with cynicism. It was with a lot of sincerity. He cared about kids. And watching these movies again, I was just again moved by, we talked about this a little bit before we started. I was moved by the impact that he made on the people around him and on the culture at large. And also sort of disheartened by the fact that we don't have a Fred Rogers now. So as far as how he impacted American culture, everybody knew who Mr. Rogers was. This was you didn't have to explain it. You said Mr. Rogers, people knew. Sweater, puppets, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Everybody knew immediately. That scene and I know we'll get into it, but that one scene in the Hanks movie, The Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, where everybody's singing on the subway train, that's not outlandish. There is very good chance that everybody on a train would know all the words to that song. So yeah, he made a huge impact on our culture. And for me personally, I'm also, and I'll end it on here, I'm a therapist as my job, and I work with a lot of kids. And so watching it from that perspective is also fascinating and very encouraging, as a way to encourage kids to, there was something he said, that emotions are mentionable and manageable, and that's such an important thing to teach not only kids, but adults as well. And if you teach them as kids, hopefully they will bring it into adulthood, reminding people not to hold those emotions in. You can mention them and you can manage them. So, that's sort of where I come at these movies with. So,
Matt, thanks so much for sharing. And Jeff, I don't want to step on your research, but can I actually throw to you, because you've sort of jumped in and got some of the highlights of Fred Rogers' you know, I guess professional life, and in some of the personal development that he was going through to go up there. And obviously there was a lot of influences that Fred Rogers had, in particular when he started working with the child psychologist Margaret McFarland. As I said, I don't want to step on your research, but I'd love to throw to you now just to start going through, the becoming Fred Rogers aspect, if you will, Jeff, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, like you said, like he studied a lot of child psychology at the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Child Development at the time, which, was a cornerstone and kind of launched a lot of these child psychologists like Margaret McFarland. I mean, I noted it was interesting, particularly from the documentary, noting that as part of that also he went to school with like Dr. Spock, who was very big in child development back in the 80s as well. And some of those sort of leaders in that space who really started this. So the level of influence and mentorship that those guys gave him obviously directed a lot of who he was and what he became. And like we noted, like I think Margaret was a very strong influence on him, but also helped him with a lot of the scripts and the songs pretty much for the entire time that Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was on, which is really, really interesting. And again, because of the level of that the show used to go into, that was, like you said, mentionable and manageable, but it was just unafraid to address feelings and thoughts that were, and probably even today is still not quite explored with children, I think is very, very interesting. So, I mean, not only that, but, he had his bachelor's degree in music composition, was the first thing he got in 1951. He got his divinity degree from the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in 1962. Both of those he graduated magna cum laude from. So he's obviously very detailed and very thorough in his learning and education, which was great. And I think then from there, he went off to work for the different, when he went into Pittsburgh Public Television at the time. So, he started out on what was originally called Children's Corner, which was the first thing that came before. It was kind of like a feeder into Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So originally ran for 7 seasons from 55 to 61. Was hosted by a woman called Josie Carey at the time. He was the producer on that. I think the puppets had already been kind of started, but he created most of them, built Daniel Striped Tiger, King Friday the 13th, X the Owl, Lady Elaine Fairchild, Henrietta Pussycat, and the other ones, which then obviously rolled into the actual Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood themselves. Interesting fact that I found in regards to that. So that ran from 55 to 61, and then from there the Canadian Broadcasting Company apparently contacted Rogers, and he went up to Toronto and developed a show up there, which went from 63 to 67. So it was the first time he'd appeared on camera. Some of the props and sets that he'd originally used were brought in, so things like the trolley and the sneakers and the castle for King Friday. So they were created by the designers up there, but then from when that ended and he came back to Pittsburgh, and that's when Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood began, that's when he fully came into being on screen. A lot of those props and sets were not recycled, not the word, but extended out from Canada back into the US. And what was known in the seminal Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood started in 1968. So, ran for, 33 years to 2001. That's just an incredible run.
Crazy.
Of which, other than a small break in the middle, which, the documentary covers very well, the fact that he decided to take a break in 76. He believed at the time he'd done everything he needed to do with regards to children's TV and information to give them to cover those feelings that they had, and took a break and went into some sort of adult programming, trying the equivalent of an adult programming, which I believe looking into it, just a bit of research, but also the documentary covers off as well. It wasn't as successful or as penetrative, as it didn't penetrate as much as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood did. And then came back off the back of superheroes, which was very interesting. So seeing that, I think that children themselves are superheroes, but they didn't need to behave like the comic book version of superheroes. And then ran that from whatever it was, 79 through to 2001. So exhaustive programmer. But I mean, it ran for years. It ran for all those years. It covered a lot of everything. I mean, Justin, I was going to bring this up. I might just mention it now. It was very interesting when we did our. It reminded me when we did our our episode on the two nuclear programs that came out in '84, the UK's Threads and the day after in the US, and the huge cultural impact the day after had in the US. Mr. Rogers did a week on nuclear war and everything like that in the same year, not directly afterwards, but shortly afterwards. He did a whole week on that, which, again, addressing nuclear war with children of a specific age at the height of the Cold War was just something you would never have anticipated doing. But again, just helped them address all that. So, yeah, really, really interesting character. Very, very impressive man is all I can really say further to that. So, yeah.
And it didn't stop there, right? I believe, I can't recall if it was JFK or his brother Robert, but he also did, be it an episode or a week, on the assassinations, right? Or whether it was one or both, I can't recall. Matt, do you know that detail?
It was Robert. It was Robert, as far as I remember in the documentary. Yeah.
And it's interesting as well. After that hiatus, maybe he was, felt compelled to jump back into this, into action, or jump back on the saddle. If you read between the lines, because of, Richard Donner's 1978 film Superman, right? And you had a whole heap of kids starting to wear capes thinking they could fly. And a lot of injuries followed. The documentary kind of, doesn't name check that specifically. Maybe that's for legal reasons. but it was pretty obvious, because there's nothing really around at that time that would have inspired people in that way. And again, just the purpose-driven aspect, can't be undersold. I mean, he was literally, led by high calling. I don't think there's really any other way to describe it. It really is quite remarkable. I was looking at some of the research that that you had done, Jeff, and in terms of the entertainment industry and peers and otherwise, he was really well recognised and rewarded. But it looks like the awards, and maybe it's because these awards didn't exist back in the 60s or 70s, but he really started to become a cultural phenomenon in the 80s. Right, and he kind of like started this run based on your list that I saw from like mid '80s right through to obviously rest in peace, his passing in the early 2000s. But do you want to hit some of the highlights in terms of how feted he was and how many awards he received over that time?
Oh, there was heaps. He's won daytime Emmys throughout the 80s into the 90s, from individual achievement in children's programming to writing in children's series to just even he won a Golden Eagle Award for children's programming in the late 80s. And also in the early 90s, he personally won a Peabody Award in 1993, which is a huge achievement as well. He won the Career Achievement Award from the Television Critics Association in 1997, and probably the big one, got his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1998. It's not the biggest one, obviously. He's probably more, I'm sure he appreciated it, but I'd imagine the awards, the Emmys and the Peabodys were probably more important to him because of understanding the impact, therefore, that his show was making on the children of America. So, yeah, very feted, very awarded. Like, I think the show just kept on delivering, hence why it kept winning all these awards.
And, you know, again, talking about just the cultural impact and him really becoming this amazing force for good, and being recognised for his, you know, exceptional contributions to a field or you know, society more broadly is, you know, I saw somewhere in the research that he was awarded 40 plus honorary degrees, right? Which is amazing. Like that's some number, right? And you know, in addition to that, I think he became, especially later in his career, exceptionally well known and sought after for you know, commencement speeches, right? And we saw that wonderful one in the documentary where you know, Matt, sort of, you know, you probably have that level of recall. Do you want to share just like your thoughts about that last commencement address that he provided?
Yeah, was that or you're talking about the one where he said, sing people into singing, laugh people into laughing? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
So I remember that's an incredible speech. Like that's an all-timer. And even to this day, when I'm watching the documentary, I'm just thinking, even from just a clinical standpoint, it's such a good reminder that sometimes we think if we just shout at people enough or explain it well enough, they will understand it and it will change their behavior. And what we know is that that's not usually true. What actually changes people's behavior is example and seeing it work. And so I think what he's saying there is, you know, stop telling people what to do. Just laugh and just sing and just be and love. And those things will breed more of it naturally. And so what's interesting is, and I don't know if this is taking us off topic and you can edit it, but I think what's interesting about that period, especially the period where he's doing more commencement speech, sort of his late period, late 90s, early 2000s, that would have been, I was a teenager in those days. And the cynicism of towards Fred Rogers really started to amp up at that point. And that's what I remember at the time, is people being like, oh, Mr. Rogers is corny. Mr. Rogers is ruining. They even touch on it, showing people on the news who, you know, say, oh, he's creating a soft generation and everybody thinks they're special. And so that's what it was. As I was watching, I was like, you know, this is what I remember, because just based on my age and how I'm so grateful that cynicism exists in the world, certainly. But the cynicism towards Mr. Rogers seems like it has slowed down, as if we have noticed, oh, we're now that he's not here, we miss it. And we're missing something. The world is missing a Fred Rogers. Not that those people don't exist. I'm sure there are Fred Rogers in the world, but a Fred Rogers that has a platform that we can all point at and say, there's a man who's trying, you know? So yeah, I mean, that's that speech. It's funny that you would ask me about it, because that one, this is probably the fourth time I've watched the documentary, and that this time that speech really stood out to me. This idea of loving behaving in ways to influence people, not just yelling or explaining things to influence them. Yeah.
I mean, powerful stuff, right? And I don't know, and apologies if I'm wrong here, Matt and Jeff, but I don't know if in the same commencement speech, but this is the 2002 Dartmouth College one that he provided, but he also, I think, broke down and discussed what he meant that everyone was special, right? And, you know, and what have you, and that. And as I said, I don't know if it was the same speech. I think it is, but I loved the way that he explained that, saying that, you know, you don't have to do anything sensational to be loved. Like that just stuck with me like a brainworm, right? And just that recognition, that acknowledgement, it's internal, it's not external. You actually need to, love yourself and be content with the feelings downside. But for him to place that in a soundbite that isn't gimmicky, that isn't designed to sell t-shirts, really comes from, a lifelong philosophy, both lived, observed, and taught. Just powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I thought about one other thing. I love the moment in the Hanks movie where the wife is talking to the reporter. What was his name again? I think you said it before.
So Tom, I think it's pronounced Tom Junod, but it could be Tom Junod, but I think it would be Junod. But in the Hanks movie, it's there's, I guess, a dramatization or fictionalization, and the character's called Lance Vogel.
Lloyd
Vogel. Lloyd Vogel. Thanks, Jeff.
Lloyd Vogel. Okay. So when she's talking to Lloyd about Fred, she says something. I wrote it down. She said, calling him a saint is unattainable, because I think the journalist had said, like, what is it like being married to a saint? And she said, calling him a saint makes him unattainable. And I remember in that moment feeling some conviction for myself, because I would look at Fred Rogers and be like, wow, what of a kind. Nobody will be like that again. And that was a reminder of, like, no, he was just a person, and these are what he chose to do. And what a good reminder for me to not just put him on a pedestal and say, well, I'm glad we got one, but to say, no, what can I do to reach for those things that will help make a difference in the world? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout, Matt. And, we do want to, deify people and otherwise. And there's a real danger in that sort of idolatry. And for that character in that film to say that, I actually believe, the more, I sort of got through only, circa 3 hours of content on the same person, that is absolutely something that she would have said numerous times or countless times throughout her life when people came up to her. And, I think that, again, is so consistent with the demystifying aspect of, these big anomalous things that can be overwhelming in life. So you can tell, again, like, the sort of like the authenticity and the talking the walk and the walking the talk. There's what you see is what you get. That's really one of the key takeaways that I had. It was really interesting to hear you talk about, really in this era now where, cynicism, skepticism is really the default. Arguably we're also in that post-truth world, and positivity isn't as feted as negativity, right? It certainly doesn't get the headlines and otherwise, but we are in deficit of positivity and kindness now. And if ever there was a time that we needed someone like Fred Rogers, we need someone like him now more than ever, right?
Yeah.
So it was a really nice shot in the arm, and it kind of felt like a nice warm embrace, and I had nothing but positive endorphins and good feelings coming out of watching these two episodes. But so look, I think that's a really quite sort of like quick but amazing flyover of an iconic life, obviously well lived. But Jeff, getting back to the task at hand, can you please take us through the numbers?
Sure thing, can do. All right, so as we always do, twin films usually come out different periods of time. So the first one to come out was Won't You Be My Neighbour? Premiered at Sundance in January of 2018, but was officially released in June of 2018. Whereas A Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood came out the following year in November of 2019, probably headed for award season, hence why it came out that little bit differently. Normally we try and compare box offices a little bit to see how they did between these films. It's a bit difficult with a documentary versus a dramatic film, because documentaries traditionally don't have the same box office figures. But anyway, Won't You Be My Neighbour opened in June 8th, 2018, made $475,000 in its opening weekend, but again, that was only on 29 screens. It went wider over the next few weeks, expanded basically every week based off those numbers for the few weeks, and actually ended its domestic run on 22.8 million, which is pretty good for a documentary of this size. Internationally, it only had a very, very limited release window, so it only took about another $11,000, $15,000 US around the world. Couldn't find a budget figure for this film, looked around, but estimates have it in the low millions. So although it potentially returns somewhere in the 8 to 10x for the studio, we won't know exactly what it is. However, a good note I found is that by the end of July in 2018, when it basically kind of peaked with its numbers, it became the highest grossing biographical film of all time. So really, really good. When A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood opened wide in November of 19, it was on 3,235 screens, so a little bit broader than the documentary. Took $13.5 million its opening weekend, and went on to earn $61.7 million domestically. Internationally, didn't do great business, which is, again, possibly understandable given, as we've touched on from the very beginning, this is probably more of an American-focused film, but did take another approximately $6.9 million and ended its worldwide with about $68.6 million total. Had a $45 million budget, so 1.5x for the studio. But it also, even though we're at the tail end of DVD hardware by the time, still took nearly another $10 million in DVD sales. So not bad considering that we'd starting on streaming towards the end of the 2018s, 19s and going into 2020. So both, not what we call peak numbers in terms of some of the other films we've discussed, but I think for the subject matter and what they are, they both did exceptionally well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. So a couple of things that I have here. I mean, obviously, the three of us find twin films fascinating because, well, for a multitude of reasons, but they give us a rare lens in that we see two visions of the same idea. One might be glossier, one might be grittier. In this instance, both the structure and really the form, so like the color and shape are qualitatively different, even though they are about the same historical character. In the Hanks film, obviously we have more of a contained story, as the influence that Fred Rogers had on one person's life. So Lloyd Lance Vogel being the fictionalized version of the journalist, Tom Janot from, Esquire magazine, and also wrote articles for GQ and otherwise. And I've got some detail on him just a little bit later on, but just really the impact that, Fred Rogers had on his life, right? And having that small window and otherwise. And the subsequent article that, Janot wrote, was, one of the best pieces of writing in a storied career, right? But then on the other one, you've really got that focus on, to your point, Jeff, that biography documentary about, one man's life, right? Just incredible. But again, this circles back to, why these two films? Why now? Why were they released, so closely together, right? So. Where I landed on this, and gentlemen, please jump in after I've sort of just given a few sort of, fun facts and the research that, I guess some of the assumptions that I made, is that Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood premiered in the US on February 1968. So 2018, when the documentary Won't You Be My Neighbor was premiered at Sundance, marked the 50th anniversary. Right. So I think in the lead up and around that, there was, obviously some anniversary programming that PBS were doing. There was probably some press around this. And I think the anniversary created a natural why now, hook both for the prestige documentary to go, I think, through quite a well, like a well, I guess, sort of like, treaded path in terms of, go, have the celebrated or hopefully celebrated response or audience reaction at Sundance, then go on a, usually what is a limited theatrical run for documentaries of that nature. But then the Hanks film, again, just the A-list star, prestige, drama / biopic, time for award season, right? And, invariably Tom Hanks received another nomination, I think this time the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, so for the Oscars for that, qualified year. So I think it was the anniversary moment, the fact that there were actually parallel tracks for development for this. What I found was A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood came from a long gestating screenplay that hit the 2013 blacklist, right? But it wasn't until TriStar, bought / announced it, literally like, close to the 50th anniversary. And I think at the same time that the documentary was premiering at Sundance, right? I think it was initially titled You Are My Friend. So kudos to whoever had the idea to rename that, because A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, at least for mine, is much more compelling. But that's really, as I see how these two came about. Again, the documentary is really that life legacy portrait of Rogers. The Hanks film, again, wasn't a straight biopic in and of itself, but really, again, that impact that he had on one person based on that Esquire piece that Tom Junot wrote that we'll touch on a little bit later. So I don't really think there was studio competition or cannibalization. I mean, if anything, I think, as 2018 was unfolding, the documentary success probably reduced any perceived risk that the studio would have had for the feature film that Tom Hanks was in, right? And the fact that it became, Jeff, to your point, a genuine cultural and commercial hit, it really would have validated, demand for, more Fred Rogers, if you will, on the big screen. So given the feature was already set up, again, probably there was a bit of a halo effect, I would imagine, in terms of marketing and awards campaigning. So I couldn't find anything else as to, if there was anything nefarious or, cultural zeitgeist or otherwise. But I think, having that anniversary moment, I think that was really the catalyst for, why now and why sort of like these two competing visions. But gentlemen, anything to add?
No, everything I found agrees with what you said, Justin. It was coming around that 50th anniversary of the show. It was also, I did see that, I believe, the trailer for Won't You Be My Neighbour, which is post-Sundance but pre-release, actually was released on the weekend of would have been his 90th birthday. So it was all, again, almost anniversary linked, tied, because, so you're right, it was just that moment in the zeitgeist. It was that great time to bring him back, and, probably successful because all those children, again, similar to Matt, have reached a certain point in life and remember this cultural icon who hasn't been on their TV screen since they were kids, and all of a sudden is back in the cultural eye. So, yeah, probably attributed to the success of both films.
Yeah. I mean, I have a quick thought. It's more based in conjecture than in the facts that you guys have. But 2018 was middle of the Trump presidency over here, which really the 2016 election, I think, was sort of a cultural turning point for a lot of Americans. It became a real sort of linchpin for division. And I think news media and politics became they became bigger in our everyday lives, and they became more difficult to emotionally process. And I think something like Fred Rogers, the 50th anniversary is, I think you're right. I think I'm certainly right, Justin, that's why that came out that year. But I think the reason it became such a big cultural moment is because I can just speak for myself and the people around me. We were desperate for kindness in media, in entertainment of some kind. And so, yeah, that's more just a side thing. I haven't done any study on this, but that's more just me playing, armchair sociologist. But I just think that there is something to a country who is feeling exhausted and being given an opportunity to go spend some time with a person who understood and listened and reminded us what it could look like to be just a decent person. Especially, I mean, even thinking about that one part in the documentary where he's addressing Congress and looking at that almost like longingly, like, oh, so somebody at that point could have come and made someone change their mind. And that feels so foreign to us now. So yeah, just maybe some like longing for, decency, I guess. Yeah.
I think that's a fascinating insight, Matt. And who is anyone really to challenge that? I mean, sort of like you're living and breathing, like you're, within, that society that is going through some, let's just call it, just a lot of transformative friction and a lot of what was held true and otherwise. And again, this is like armchair critic or observer from afar. A lot of things that were held as sacrosanct or desirable or whatever that Likert scale seems to look like, seem to be eroded or traded away in short order and replaced with something that was less appealing, right? So to have that comfort blanket, right?
Yeah.
To have that as the thing that film does best is temporary suspension of disbelief, right? So to maybe have that small, to use an Australian parlance, chop out where you have that that small break where you can be reminded that America at its best self, right, lauded decency, and one of the best of us, right, was Fred Rogers. So that really resonates, with me, and thank you so much for sharing. I think that's on point. So let's get into some of the creative minds behind these two films. So I'll actually mix this up, and I'll start with Won't You Be My Neighbor first. So first of all, I was so happy to watch this because I'm not a huge documentary guy, and shame on me, right? I mean, I think, but the crazy thing is, like, every time I watch a documentary, I love it for the most part.
Same. Totally the same.
Yeah, but like I just love, and I mean, as you know, Jeff, I'm a voracious reader, and I'm sort of like smashing the Kindle every single day. But again, I'm a fiction guy. I want escapist fantasy. But I was so happy to watch Won't You Be My Neighbor, and look at Morgan Neville, the director. What a career he's had, right? I mean, let me share with you some of his music documentaries. So going down in, I guess, descending order. So most recent to earlier on in his career. So 2025, he does Man on the Run, which is about Paul McCartney forming Wings after the Beatles broke up. Back in 2023, he did Bono and the Edge, a sort of homecoming with Dave Letterman. In 2010, he did Keith Richards, Under the Influence. I know my brother-in-law would love to see that one. In 2008, he did Johnny Cash's America. In 2000, he did Sam Phillips, The Man Who Invented Rock and Roll. So I did a small amount of research because I went, who is Sam Phillips? That was interesting. So he was the founder of Sun Records, and he discovered and recorded legendary artists like Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins. Giant of rock and roll. Then in 1999, he did Brian Wilson, A Beach Boy's Tale. I mean, that's like, a rogues gallery, who's who. I mean, like, what amazing subject matter he did in that. But then he's also known for his cultural documentaries. Now, I've really limited this because I think maybe some of the other ones didn't jump out at me, but the ones that did jump out at me is that and one that will be close to all of our heart that I actually want to seek out on a personal basis, is in 2018 he did They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, which was about Orson Welles' last 15 years and this film that he was trying to create as, his last, sort of like creative endeavor in film before his passing. In 2021, he did Roadrunner, which is a film about Anthony Bourdain, and he did Steve, ! For a bit of extra fun, Martin, a documentary in 2 pieces in 2024. So he has had some career, and watching this documentary, it really felt that it was done with not just a shorthand, but a real flair, and had quite a cinematic, feel. And it was interesting, even when they had almost what felt like interstitial moments where there were their interviews with, be it his sons or, other people in his life and otherwise. It felt like you were, being propelled really in a narrative sense, and the fact that so much of their highly curated selections of Fred's pre-recorded content that he would have done decades ago, and using that as the device to propel that narrative. Again, Morgan Neville, based on my sample size of one, serious talent, and someone who's I guess kind of like back. What's the right way of saying kind of like jumping into sort of like someone's sort of like film oeuvre, but his films that I really need to watch that I haven't watched, and some of these will be added to the queue for sure.
Oh, his back catalogue is definitely worth exploring, that's for sure. So yeah, some of those, when I was looking him up, just going, wow, I've got to go and try and track a couple of these down myself. So yeah, actually, he's got one that you a lot of those I love. One that you actually didn't mention was the Pharrell Williams biopic that's all Legos, called Piece by Piece. I don't know if either of you have seen that one. I've seen the trailer. I've never actually seen the film.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring that one up specifically, mainly because I'm not like a huge Pharrell Williams guy, but the movie I think is very fascinating. I've never seen anything like it. It is just a music biopic, but it's told with Legos. And I wanted to bring it up on this particularly because depending on how broad you consider, how broad you're going to make the definition of a twin film, I think it could make a good pairing with that Robbie Williams documentary, which is also another biopic told in sort of a non-traditional manner because he's played by a chimp in that one. And so I included it on my list. It might be too broad for you guys, but I think that would be a good double feature, is Piece by Piece. And I can't remember what that other movie is called. But
A Better Man. It's called A Better Man.
A Better Man. There you go.
Yeah. Actually, we do know it quite well here because we're in Melbourne, Matt, and they shot it all down here.
Oh, okay. And is Robbie Williams as famous over there as he is in Europe?
I would say yes.
Yeah, 100%.
Because he's not that famous here at all. He's. I mean, we kind of know who he is, but I hear he's like a superstar most of the world, just not here for some reason.
Matt, 100%. He's huge, and look, not all acts from the UK or from the Antipodes, which is Australia, New Zealand, and others. Translate and resonate with a US audience, but Robbie Williams is an outsized superstar in obviously home territory and also here in Australia, to the point, and this kind of, Jeff, this may surprise you as well, like my parents in the baby boomer generation and otherwise, they are massive Robbie Williams fans, right? And I remember, because I live on the East Coast, my parents live on the West Coast of Australia, and I remember one year going back, for Christmas, and as you do, you spend a lot of time with your family just hanging out and chilling, and the festive period over here is also in our equivalent to your July, Matt, right? So this is where we have all of our holidays and schools on break for an extended period of time and what have you. And I was, they have a farm about 2 hours south of Perth, which is, the major city on the West Coast. And I remember, we'd finished dinner, we were sitting down, and randomly, like, my dad's just consuming, content now on YouTube. How things have changed.
Right.
Jeff, very different to when you and I growing up, and our parents would be, it's like, I'm watching such and such on ABC, and we're like, and like, of course you are. But they were putting on this performance that Robbie Williams was given at Royal Albert Hall, and I'm like, I didn't expect that. Like, I mean, if they had wheeled out, some performance that, sort of like Cream did in the late 60s or 70s, or, sort of like, Neil Diamond or whomever, that wouldn't have surprised me. But the fact they wheeled out this Robert Williams performance, it did surprise me. And it was both like a huge performance, but really intimate at the same time. And it was just incredible. But yeah, Robbie Williams has a massive impact sort of like down here. But I think that's interesting, and certainly a topic for discussion another day in terms of, how broad do we want to make that definition of twin films? Because you raised a great point, and something we should chat about further offline. But let me jump in now to the director for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. So hopefully I'm pronouncing this name, Marielle Heller, correctly. So her debut film was an indie called Diary of a Teenage Girl that came out in 2015, had Alexander Skarsgård and Kristen Wiig, whom I love. She followed that with Can You Ever Forgive Me in 2018, which starred Melissa McCarthy and Richard E. Grant. Again, love them both as well, particularly Richard E. Grant. And I actually remember watching that, and I think that's Melissa McCarthy as a writer. So that was a fun one. And then she does this film, obviously, in 2019. And then in 2020, she does an interesting film called What the Constitution Means to Me, which was a live Broadway cast production of Heidi Schreck's play, which was also a finalist for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize for Drama. And it presented multiple facets and historical perspectives and personal experience, with the US Constitution, which, to echo or pick up on your earlier remark about the mood in 2018 and why now and why this film, well, like back to back, almost in simultaneous or parallel development, she's doing something about the American Constitution. So, Matt, I mean, there's just another data point, not to say that we needed one, but, further validation that there was certainly something in the water, something in the air. And, then you have this one person, really starting to do a bit of a double click, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And even honestly, even the film before A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is all about whether you can trust media. So that was clearly this whole idea of these sort of mixtures of, basically what's happening in our country, sort of in the air of our country. That was very interesting to her in this, couple of year span, for sure. So
let's get into, usually now we do sort of, key cast in their career followed by supporting cast. We've already spoken a bit about, Fred Rogers, and we'll continue to speak about him, throughout, but focusing on, the feature film Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, obviously Tom Hanks, again, acting titan, again, having a really, I think, solid period of work. I mean, for me, Tom Hanks, I think, had a pretty amazing 20-year run, right? Where more hits and misses. And obviously, I think he was completely unparalleled in that sort of like mid-90s to like early 2000s. Like he was, the biggest, one of the biggest stars on the planet. But I'd really say that peak Hanks, at least for me, in the peanut gallery for what it's worth, was 1986 to say 2006, right? And that's when I think, he came out with the sort of like Dan Brown adaptation. The one that he did in 2006, what was that called?
Da Vinci Code?
Da Vinci Code?
Da Vinci Code, that's right. And then it was Angels and Demons, wasn't it, in like 20, I think came out 3 years later in 2009. But like that was probably like the last him as like a super solid, super consistent performer and otherwise. And, he had this incredible run. Now, you know, I would say, and again, you know, this guy's had one of the most amazing careers, and nothing lasts forever. But you know, really, in the 2000s, his output post 2006, for mine at least, certainly lacked the consistency that, you know, the previous 20 years had. And again, nothing lasts forever. I mean, you know, he was still, you know, cranking out his voices, you know, as Woody in the Toy Story series. But then he'd be doing, you know, say for every, you know, say, you know, Captain Phillips or whatever, or Bridget Spies, he'd end up doing, you know, films that weren't as great. I mean, there's no other way of saying that. I'm not going to litigate against some of his choices or otherwise, but 2019, you know, circa this time, he's having actually a pretty good run, right? So you think about it, he had The Post, which I actually quite enjoyed. I mean, I love journalism films or films about journalism anyway, but he did The Post in 2017, obviously with Spielberg. He voices Woody in Toy Story 4 in 2019, followed by Greyhound, and then News of the World and Finch in 2020. And then he's obviously Colonel Tom Parker in Elvis with Austin Butler in 2022. And again, very specifically for this performance, he was nominated for the 2020 Best Performance by a Supporting Actor at the Oscars that year. So not to say, I mean, this isn't someone who has a late career resurgence and otherwise, but he put together, I think, a really solid body of work around this time where he is going through sort of like this decade or probably 2 decades now where his output isn't as consistently, you know, celebrated or lauded or recognized than obviously you know, the first half of his career and otherwise. But again, like, I've always liked Tom Hanks, eminently likable, and you know, I couldn't imagine, I don't know about you gentlemen, I couldn't imagine anyone else playing Fred Rogers other than Tom Hanks.
No, he totally embodied him. It was amazing because, I mean, for me specifically, I did this first, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and then I will watch Won't You Be My Neighbor, and I think almost that's the best way to do it because you get the dramatization of him, you see the performance Hanks gives, and then you actually get to see the real Fred Rogers. And at that point, going backwards, you do see how much Hanks fully embodies the man and the spirit of the man, who he is, what he was, what he believed in. Well, like you said, Justin, the film's obviously more of a snapshot in time in the relationship with Lloyd / Lance Vogel / Tom Junot, and how that played out. So I think, yeah, Hanks is incredible in this. Like, he, for me, thoroughly deserved the nomination.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think I think what's so good about this performance is that it doesn't feel like a guy doing an impression. He's certainly putting an affect on. He's got a little bit of an accent, but I think, Jeff, like you said, he's just sort of embodying the spirit of Fred Rogers more than anything else. I think that this is, well, outside, I was going to say it's his like best late period performance, although I do love his performance in Captain Phillips. But this is certainly up there. This is an incredible, it's such a, there's a moment in the movie where he just has to look at the camera for an extended period of time. And the movie's, I take it as like the director, Mariel Heller, sort of like asking the audience to like become part of what's happening. And I was thinking this most recent time when I watched it, what a hard thing that is to do, to look down the barrel of the camera when you're playing a real person and say, not only do you have to believe who I am, I need you to get involved in what we're doing. It's just a simple moment, but yeah, no, I totally agree. I think I love Tom Hanks. I've always loved Tom Hanks. And I think that this was in that period where he was playing a lot of real people. He was sort of the go-to guy for like real American, like when I say real Americans, I mean actual Americans, not like I don't mean that in some sort of weird jingoistic manly way. I mean it more in like literally he's playing real people who are Americans. Anyways, but yeah, I love his performance in this. And yeah, Justin, as you were asking like who else could play, I was sitting here trying to like reel through people. I don't know who else would we buy in that role except for a guy who I don't know if it has gotten over to Australia, but the guy we call America's dad so often. He can pull it off.
And, I'd almost go as far that I would speculate, and no way for us to be proven, right or wrong on this one, but if Hank says no, they probably don't do it, right? And even if they do it, we're probably not talking about it.
Right.
It's just seriously, for me at least, impossible to imagine anyone else doing it. And he certainly was going through some sort of run, really playing like real life figures and otherwise, right? I think if there was one thing to characterize, circa the last sort of 20 years of his career, it's his leaning into, dramatized versions of, be it historical or just, real life people. And he's a supernova talent, and he lends himself to these roles in an incredible way because of his humanity. I think that just sort of like comes off every performance that he does. So let's jump into the supporting cast. So Matthew Rhys obviously plays our good friend Lloyd/Lance Vogel. What was interesting is that he was actually also in The Post with Hanks, and he plays another journalist, Daniel Ellsberg, right? So I thought that was fun. He was in the TV series The Americans, which ran 2013 to 2018.
Which is an incredible series, and he's amazing. Him and Kerry Russell are just fantastic.
I love Kerry Russell. Jeff, I've got to admit, I only saw like half of season 1, and it was one of those ones where I liked it. There was no reason for me to kind of give it away, but I've just never gone back to revisit. And because content is like standing in front of a fire hose, with a,
straw.
With a straw or a teacup trying to stop it, or otherwise you just get overwhelmed, and the current takes you to the next thing or next compelling event to watch, and otherwise. But yeah, I mean, from what I saw, I liked. I mean, he was also in Cocaine Bear, which is a guilty pleasure movie of mine in 2023. Like that was a lot of fun. Again, saw that one at the cinema. How can I not? That was actually with my friend Steve. We try and seek out and see every trashy movie that we can on a monthly basis, and that was good trash. So thank you, Matthew. I know he wasn't the lead or otherwise, but he was also Perry Mason in the rebooted TV series Perry Mason. Which my maternal grandmother put me onto. Obviously, I was watching the sort of the much earlier version of that, but again, solid working actor. I think this would certainly be a high watermark of his career. Given the fact that he's cresting off The Americans. Obviously in that run, he's also with Hanks twice. Which is no small achievement. We've also then got the ever reliable Chris Cooper. I love this guy. I mean, he brings it in every single film he ever brings, and as a supporting actor, he almost outshines some of the lead actors, I think, in a lot of what he does. So let's talk about very specifically his, choices before and after this film. He appears in Affleck's Live by Night in 2016. He voices Smokey in Cars 3 in 2017, and then he does this and Little Women in 2019, right? And then he stars in the second season of the Amazon TV series Homecoming in 2020. So again, he usually doesn't make bad choices, and he is someone I love watching on screen every single time I see him. So I'm always happy to see him. Then we go to Susan Kalichi Watson, and hopefully I've got that pronunciation correct. this is pretty much, the highest profile film of her career. So she's obviously playing the wife of our friend Lloyd. And then we've got Marianne Plunkett, who plays, the wife of Fred Rogers, Tom Hanks' wife in this one. She also appeared, fun fact, same year with Chris Cooper in Little Women. So I thought that was interesting. So let's get into the inspiration of this. Like we've mentioned this. So a journalist by the name of Tom Junot in 1998 had an Esquire profile of Fred Rogers called Can You Say Hero, right? And this was really inspired by Junot's real-life profile and relationship with Rogers. If I had to characterize that article, and I think in the film, the actress, Susan playing Lloyd's wife says, "Oh, this is like 10,000 words." I actually sourced the article, it's a bit over 8,000. Just not
just
to
being
quibble,
pedantic.
not to quibble or be pedantic, but doing that exact thing. But effectively, Junot really kind of like characterizes, Fred Rogers as a man whose power comes from small repeated acts of care and almost a disarming insistence on intimacy, right? He shows Rogers' disciplined routine, like swimming, weighing himself, and in fact, he's also always 143 pounds, which comes out in the documentary, writing, praying, his belief that language matters. Phrases like, "You're a child once too," "Bring the dog home," his ability to make strangers feel seen. And then through his encounters with Coco the gorilla, the disabled boy who also features in the documentary, the crowds in Penn Station, Juno really argues that Rogers is greedy for grace, right? And he fights TV's, fragmentation with silence, steadiness, and moral clarity, which is, some of the salient points that you were remarking on earlier in the pod, Matt.
Yeah, I shamefully have not read the article. I want to very badly. In fact, after I watched the movie, I was like, oh, I should read that, and I didn't. And now I'm realizing why I should. Did you get the sense from the article, Justin, that because the movie presents Lloyd or Tom or Lance as sort of making it, obviously changing, that he starts one way, and by the end Fred has actually completely shifted his perspective on life. Did you get the sense reading it that was the case in real life as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a bit of, dramatic license,
Sure.
Not just by the filmmakers, but then also by Tom writing the article, right? And I'll actually share the article with you, obviously, post the recording. But yeah, he came in thinking one way, which is, at the highest level, embittered, cynical, skeptical, looking for the gotcha in the aha. So there are elements that are echoed, obviously amplified within the movie, but then kind of comes out saying, you know what, this is what you see is what you get. Having some pointed sort of feedback in a very forgiving and comfortable and safe environment, and moments for some silent reflection. He certainly went through, I think, a reevaluation as to his outlook on life, 100%. Right? Fred Rogers had a positive impact that did it change the course and direction of his life? I can't answer that. How could I? But sure. It certainly influenced and changed, I think, his thinking and approach to life in a positive manner.
Yeah. And Tom was in the documentary, correct?
Yeah, and
that's what I thought, yeah.
And I wanted to remark on this. Now maybe it was just me, but did he or did he not look a little bit like Joaquin Phoenix?
100%.
Now I have to look him up. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong guy. Hold on.
But at the same time, he does look, don't get me wrong, he looks like Joaquin Phoenix. But there was also, the first time I saw him, I went, he looks like Joaquin Phoenix. But then, and this is going to sound weird saying it, there's still a bit of Matthew Rhys in there. I saw in his face. So the lady, the Marianne that they cast as Joanne Rogers, she could practically be her doppelganger. She was incredible, a similarity.
Perfect, yeah.
Yeah, spot on. So let's jump into the one question that we always ask, Matt, is do either one of these films have an Australian or an Aussie connection? That's a hard no. Again, super focused American story about an American cultural icon. There were no Australians involved, either in front or behind the camera. I even did a triple click to see if there was any sort of Australian money that helped finance this, because I was like clutching at straws and I just wanted to be part of that halo effect. Yeah, zero. I couldn't find anything in my research. Jeff?
Yeah, same. The same. Yep. I kind of kept going, and again, I didn't go triple click. I went double click, and after that, I went, "These are two American films." I can't. I mean, unless there's, I'm not even sure, but probably in the back somewhere, maybe there's an SFX guy who works for one of the digital houses somewhere. But you'd have to. That would be one hell of a deep dive to find them.
100%.
I that was intentional. I was just trying to make you guys feel bad. That's why I picked these.
Very
anti Mr. Rogers thought.
No. Well, I mean, like, Americans are like world leaders in a whole heap of categories, and look, I mean, like, this is another W in sort of like the Team USA column, and again, we were just fighting for halo effect. We wanted some reflected glory here, but sadly, not to be, at least this time. So what we usually do now is jump into some production stories and some fun facts. So I want to launch off with this one, Jeff, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And then I'll throw to you. So I've got one fact, but in two parts, if you will, right? Or at least one category. So days before A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood premiered, Ancestry.com, I believe it was, confirmed that Tom Hanks and Fred Rogers are actually six cousins.
Whoa.
Yeah,
I found that as well. That was quite a good fact, fun fact to find.
Isn't that wild? Now,
wild.
I've got something else that is going to bend your mind even further. Right? This is the third time that Tom Hanks has played a distant cousin of his. He's also distantly related to Walt Disney, who he played in Saving Mr. Banks in 2013, and Ben Bradley, who he played in The Post in 2017.
Whoa. Weird. That's why. That's great. Before the Ben Bradley one, I was like, oh, it's all children's entertainers, children's icons, really. Yeah. Ben Bradley doesn't fit, but otherwise, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more wild facts that we've encountered in this short time that we've been doing this, Jeff.
Absolutely. I mean, look, maybe there's a conspiracy that Hollywood will only give Tom Hanks films of people he's related to. We don't know.
100%. 100%. That's definitely what it is.
So, Jeff, I've got others, but I'll throw to you some fun facts about A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.
Well, all right, yes. So, again, just going back to that scene that Matt spoke about in the film, the restaurant scene, the 1 minute of silence as the camera does the slow zoom into him. So that scene was actually one of the first artistic choices that Hella made as a director, because she said it was written in the script purely as a moment, but she wanted to expand on it. And because I personally, the same thing, I remember watching it and thinking, is Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers looking at me down the camera? And you have a moment of, but hang on a second, this is a film. You don't, I mean, unless it's specific to break the fourth wall, you don't do that. But then it does. But that was her actual choice to do that on purpose, to bring you as an audience member into the film and say, Mr. Rogers is talking to you, right? But also in the restaurant, it actually points out that all the people sitting in the restaurant during that minute silence are all members of his family and cast and crew. So Joanne Rogers is there, David Newell is there, Margaret Whitmer's there, Bill Eiler, his producer, was there. Mr. McFeely was there. There was another producer of the show was there, and the Asian guy's name I can't remember. The CEO of the Fred Rogers company is in the restaurant as well. So they all did that scene as a tribute to him with the whole minute of silence, because that was one of his big touch points. So yeah, there was that. In terms of just a couple other things I found for fun facts. So the puppets.
Actually, Jeff, before you go for it, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
No.
I was just thinking about that, how both these movies have a moment towards the end where the movie intentionally sort of turns focus away from what's on the screen and towards the viewer.
Yes.
Because there's that scene in that movie. And then in the documentary, it says, think of somebody who has, changed your life or affected your life in a positive way. And the movie gets quiet. Like, it shows people, but it doesn't say anything. And I took that as, they're asking me to do it as well. And I realized that's because that was Mr. Rogers' whole thing. He was constantly, he just talked down the barrel of the camera to kids and was, you really felt like he was, listening and connecting. So anyways, I just thought that was an interesting connection they both have.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah. And again, same thing, done differently, but obviously both films picked up on that and used Mr. Rogers' own techniques within the film, which are really, really strong. So, yeah, but sorry, a couple more fun facts. So there weren't the original puppets, but they were meticulously remade copies. They were actually built by a gentleman named Spencer Lott, who's going PBS connection. It was a Sesame Street puppeteer. So he was tasked with building those. There's a fact that I think Justin also found at the same time, but I'm going to jump in and steal it from you. Sorry, mate. So Tom Hanks has come out and claimed that he and Mariel Heller went and saw Won't You Be My Neighbour in 2018, attended the documentary, and he admitted to being so impressed when he walked out. He looked at her and said, "Is there any reason for us to make our movie?" Because they were so impressed by the doco, which is great. Now, going back to a point that you guys have made, Mariel Heller was actually very good friends with Colin Hanks, Tom's son, and met Tom at a birthday party. I don't know if it was Colin Hanks' birthday, but met him at a birthday party, and that's when she pitched him the film, right? And he was interested. Now, she's said, I'm lucky to get him because at the time, apparently, because he had... Again, this all goes back to what Justin was mentioning, started taking a lot of those roles where he was playing people in real life as compared to his more dramatic and humorous roles he'd done in earlier career. He had actually put it out through his agency that I don't want to play these roles. I want to take a break from playing real people and these deep dramatic things. And so I don't want to do it. So she says I'm incredibly lucky because she was in the room with him and managed to pitch it to him at a time when he actually didn't want to play people like that anymore. So... I think lucky for all of us in the sense that we managed to get him to play this. So, and probably the last fact I have at the moment is, so according to the DVD commentary, there's some notes I found on the DVD commentary. So the string quartet, the black ladies he finds in New York with the string quartet are playing while Lloyd/Lance is watching Mr. Rogers interact with them. So they were chosen at the time to come back because they were the actual string quartet who were in the actual episode in the right year. However, apparently they'd barely ever played or seen each other in the 20 years since that happened. And so they came back together for the film, they were in it, and they've openly said that thanks to that we've all reconnected and they get back together and now play music. So I guess the legacy of Fred Rogers has not disappeared because he's managed to bring these ladies together again. So, yeah, I think that's really, really cool.
Incredible.
Justin, you have got anything else?
Yeah, just a final one, and that is cool, by the way. Just the the ability to continue to connect and bring people together posthumously is just amazing. Again, just speaks to the outsized impact that he had as the cultural icon he was. So I don't want to end it on a down point, but it's the last point that I have. So apologies in advance, gentlemen. But there was a 61-year-old Emmy Award winner for original sound mixing for a limited series or movie, a gentleman by the name of Jim Emswiller, who he was involved in sound production, obviously, within the film. But halfway through production, he had a heart attack and fell over a brick wall from a balcony at an apartment building, and unfortunately, later passed away at the hospital. And there's a dedication of the movie to Emswiller in the closing credits. So, it's always never wonderful to hear that, but that was something else that I found. So let's go over to Won't You Be My Neighbour, and sort of fun facts and otherwise here. I just want to start off, as I mentioned, shame on me, as I said, that this is the first Morgan Neville production that I have seen, and I am going to go through his back catalogue. But he's been nominated for Grammys for films including Respect Yourself, The Stax Records Story, Muddy Waters, Can't Be Satisfied, Johnny Cash's America, The Music of Strangers, Yo-Yo Ma, and Yo-Yo Ma is obviously in the documentary as well. Silk Road, Yo-Yo Ma and the Silk Road Ensemble. That's a bit of a mouth word, but and again has done other films that I hadn't mentioned in the opening spiel, including The Cool School, Shotgun Freeway, and as producer, Miss Americana, Beauty's Embarrassing, and Crossfire Hurricane. His 2014 film 20 Feet from Stardom won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, as well as the Grammy Award for Best Music Film. So again, a real behemoth, who is extremely well lauded and celebrated in documentary filmmaking. As I said, certainly someone whose back catalogue I really need to spend a bit of time on. Now, the other interesting thing about this is, Tom Junot, and maybe I should have had this in the fun facts for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. He, again, celebrated journalist as well. So he's a recipient of 2 National Magazine Awards from the American Society of Magazine Editors, one for a profile of John Britton, an abortion doctor, that came out in February of 1994. And the article was entitled The Abortionist, and that was published in GQ magazine. And then, which is a really weird sort of, I wouldn't exactly call it a companion piece, but obviously another article he did a year later, or a bit over a year later, was a profile for a rapist undergoing therapy while enduring what is known as civil commitment. The rapist says he's sorry, an article that was published in GQ in December of 1995. Another one of Junot's articles, 2003's The Falling Man, published in Esquire, was also turned into a film entitled 9/11, The Falling Man, came out in 2006. And obviously the Falling Man was that iconic and indelible image. It was a photo taken by an Associated Press photographer by the name of Richard Drew of an unidentified man falling from the World Trade Center during the September 11 attacks in New York City. The unidentified man in the image was trapped on the upper floors of the North Tower, and whether he sort of fell while searching for a safe place or jumped to escape the fire and smoke was unknown. But that was another celebrated article of Junot, and as I said, subsequently turned into a film. I didn't really pull up any other kind of fun facts and otherwise, because I think the whole idea of a biography documentary is that the majority of things that matter, right, are generally surfaced in, the sort of the 90 minutes that the documentary lasts for. So I'm pretty light on any further detail. So Jeff and Matt, did you find anything else about Won't You Be My Neighbour?
Matt, Oliver, you can go first.
I got nothing.
All right, I have a few things. So, and I can end on a very interesting fact that, again, connects things, but we'll get to that. First of all, Barack Obama puts out his favourite films of the year. Normally, has done since he became president. He nominated "Won't You Be My Neighbour" as one of his top films of 2018. So, he did that. Now, Justin, you were talking about nominations. This documentary was nominated in 34 different film awards throughout its term, and actually won 54 awards. Because obviously some of those award ceremonies have multiple categories. So this doco's won 54 awards since 2018, which is very, very impressive. Now, when the filmmakers went in to start this and were given access to the Fred Rogers Company, they discovered boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of undigitized film reels, lost interviews, never before seen footage of Fred, everything like that. And by scrolling through it, as well as using what was there and the people they interviewed, nearly 70% of everything they found actually ended up on the cutting room floor because there was just too much in regards to this. But also because they wanted Fred to talk to the audience, and everything they had that they used, which obviously we can attest to having seen it, is more about letting Fred run with it. So, and they decided to do it. They did the film from inside out. So they went with they started with Fred's close confidant, his family and his very close crew members, as you can see, and then slowly sort of moved outwards to the group and the people who are connected with him. So just to unpack the story, which again I think comes across so eloquently in this. However, the one person that we don't really see is Betty Aberlin, who played Lady Aberlin. And that's because she hadn't actually done an interview since Fred died, essentially. And she was so deeply insecure about being on camera that she wasn't. That's why you don't see her or barely see her other than from old footage. So a little interesting fact about the Coco the gorilla sequence in the film. So although you see that sequence towards the end and she sits there and he's with her and she takes her shoes off, what's not explained and only came out, and actually Coco the gorilla actually died in 2018, unfortunately. But at the time when that was announced, so part of her training and growth and what she watched Mr. Rogers religiously every day. So her trainers actually showed her that. So when she met Mr. Rogers, the understanding is the reason she took his shoes off in that sequence is because she was so attuned to that's what she would witness every single day because she would watch him. So, and I'll end with this last fun fact which I mentioned. So, do we know how Batman is related to Mr. Rogers, who Won't You Be My Neighbour? Do we know, Justin, Matt?
This is the fact I think I'm most excited by.
Okay, cool. So Michael Keaton first appeared on television on Pittsburgh Public TV in the early 70s and was actually in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in 1975. So he played one of the Flying Zucchini Brothers, who I'm not sure who they are, but obviously characters who appeared on the show in 1975. And he was also a full-time production assistant on the show at the time in the early 70s before taking that leap to move to Hollywood and become an actor. So when actually Fred Rogers died in 2003, he hosted the PBS Memorial Tribute called Fred Rogers, America's Favourite Neighborhood in 2003. And then again on that 50th anniversary in 2018, he hosted the special called Mr. Rogers, It's You I Like. So obviously had a strong connection, and that's why PBS asked him to come back. So there's my facts for today.
So Jeff, I think you've just won the pod.
I'll take that.
I'll try and salvage some ego respectability in terms of an observation that I had. I'm not going to come close to that. That wins. Well done.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about the influence in a different way for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So as we know, every episode is highly ritualistic, right? It begins with a camera's eyes view of a model of a neighborhood. And then it tracks in closer to a representation of a house. There's a piano instrumental of a theme song, Won't You Be My Neighbor? That piece of music was actually inspired by a Beethoven sonata. The camera then zooms into a model representing Mr. Rogers' house, then cuts to the interior, pans across the room to the front door. Mr. Rogers opens as he sings the theme song. You know, we know what unfurls there. But then at the end of the show, Mr. Rogers then exits the front door and he ends the song, and the camera zooms out of his home, pans across, the neighborhood model, and the episode ends. So I decided to call this pattern, if you will, the Rogers-style ritual portal shows, right? So there's a repeated arrival opener that moves you into a contained world or set, right? And then 2, there's a repeated goodbye return closer that moves you out again, right? Now, this inspired a whole heap of things. There was obviously children-related TV content, a show called The Friendly Giant in Canada, right, released by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It's, again, the opening panning over a detailed model village, zooms into a model castle, the drawbridge drops and the doors open, inviting you in. Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, I don't think I need to say that's obviously a direct influence. It's the same neighborhood framing, same opening, ending elements and tributes to the original miniature neighborhood and the trolley idea. And then very similar in function in terms of, ritualized entry, familiar set, portal device. Jeff, Play School.
Play School, 100%.
So, again, it's not a model neighborhood zoom, Matt, for your benefit, but there's a strong equivalent ritual and fixed home base. There's the iconic set, there's the 3 windows, the round window, the square window, and the arch window, Jeff, yes. as portals to the outside world. Matt, I would say watch Play School, but that would kind of maybe feel a bit weird. But maybe you could write that off as professional development. I don't know.
I've got kids. That can be my excuse.
There you go. Yeah.
So again, portals to the outside world, repeated structure, a calm and steady pace. Which is a key point that you made, Matt. A show called Bagpuss in the UK. Again, really Rogers adjacent in technique. Every episode begins the same way. Intro framing, Emily brings an object, the world wakes up, and it ends by returning to the frame. The repetition, like a lot of these things, is the point, that ritualistic nature of this. Camberwick Green, again from the UK, a classic example of, the world begins inside an object. Each episode starts with a musical box. The box opens, and the episode's key figure rises into place as the story world begins. And then also from the UK, and one of my children's favourites when they were very young, was In the Night Garden, right? So it's a different mechanism, right? It's more of a bedtiming cousin with a framed arrival and a consistent goodbye. So it starts off with this dream bedtime journey rather than come into my house, but it's designed around, again, this calming bedtime rhythm and repeated structure aiming at helping children relax. So, really, really quite seminal in terms of, him, creating the template that became, repeated and iterated over the journey. The only other thing that I wanted to end on is zooming out a whole heap. As we were thinking about, how frequently does a biopic and then a biography documentary, in such a short period of time. So the window that I had was a year and a half. I did a search where the documents could have a theatrical release or, prestige streaming or, prestige TV specials that at least ran for 85 minutes. So more sort of feature length. I did best I could, a bit of a glance over, really the last, 35 years. But I only really uncovered 7 examples of this in the last decade. So the order's a little bit all over the joint, but I'll start off maybe with, the most influential ones sort of first and then just bounce around. So obviously, Fred Rogers, we've just covered that on this episode, right? 2018 was obviously the documentary. 2019 was the feature film. Then we go Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? So there was a documentary, RBG, released in 2018. And then later that year, in December, the feature film On the Basis of Sex. Steve Jobs, there was a documentary called Steve Jobs, The Man in the Machine, released in September of 2015. And then the feature film Steve Jobs was released a month later in October. Then again, sort of descending kind of cultural impact or influence. And you could probably throw a blanket around these. There was most recently Diana, Princess of Wales. There was a documentary that streamed on HBO called The Princess. That was in August of 2022. And there was a feature film called Spencer. Her maiden name, Jeff, if I'm
That's
not mistaken,
correct. Yep.
released in November 2021. There was also a documentary on Marilyn Monroe called The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, The Unheard Tapes, released in 2022 in April. And a feature film, Jeff, I think it was actually directed by Andrew Dominic, same guy who did Chopper. So
that's Blonde, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Blonde. That also
yeah.
came out in 2022. Now, I don't actually think he's an Australian, even though most of his work is in Australia. I think he's actually a Kiwi, isn't he? Do you know?
I don't remember where Dominic is from.
Anyway, then there's, you see, like Matt, we always try and kind of like throw in as many references to Australian creators or fun facts and otherwise. There was also James Brown. So there was, again, a feature film called Get On Up, released in 2014. Later on that year, there was a documentary called Mr. Dynamite, The Rise of James Brown, which debuted in October on HBO, right? And then finally, the last one that I found was on the inimitable and amazing jazz singer Nina Simone. So the documentary What Happened, Miss Simone, that was released in 2015. And a year later, in 2016, there was a feature film called Nina, right? Now, obviously, Mount Rushmore, right, is like, you know, there's Fred Rogers, there's RBG, and there's Steve Jobs, and I think the fourth position is being competed for, right? The only other pairing that had the closest cultural impact and critical response and otherwise to Fred Rogers was, the RBG on the basis of sex, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So RBG grossed about 14.4 million worldwide. It scored 2 Oscar nominations, right? Documentary, feature, and original song. On the basis of sex grossed about 38.8 million worldwide, but didn't have, the top tier awards impact and Oscars and otherwise. It was more kind of like smaller festival or circuit, recognition. It was a pretty strong moment, pretty solid, but again, didn't have the same impact. And then I'd really probably put down on the next tier is Steve Jobs, right? Obviously there was the feature received critical acclaim and Oscar nominations, actor and supporting actress, but it was a modest box office, 34.4 million worldwide. Generally probably described as a financial disappointment. Documentary received generally favorable reviews, but it didn't become, the must-see cultural event that Won't You Be My Neighbor did. So I thought I'd leave on that. So even though this is like happened before, it probably hasn't happened as much as we'd otherwise think it would. So certainly almost one out of the box. But again, I think, there can only ever be sort of like one Fred Rogers, really is this, singular force, for good. There's not many people that come around him in a generation, let alone lifetime or, in history and otherwise. So I thought that was an interesting way to leave the pod. But gentlemen, before we start to say our goodbyes and otherwise, any final thoughts? I'll start with Matt.
Yeah, I think what I want to kind of just point out, that's my final thought. I'll address both movies. Won't You Be My Neighbor I'm actually a huge documentary fan. Won't You Be My Neighbor is often cited as my favorite. I think because of the Neville's ability to sort of capture the spirit of Fred Rogers in an hour and a half, 100 minutes or whatever it is. I think it's kind of it's pretty astounding. But I think what I really love about the Mariel Heller's movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, is that I think that movie is as bold and as gentle and as kind as Fred is. I think that because we so focus on how kind and gentle he is, we forget how experimental he was just as a as an entertainer, as a filmmaker. A lot of the things you were talking about, Justin, even with his choices and things that a lot of kids' films have sort of cribbed from him over the years. He was a singular human being, but I also think just a singular voice in the media entertainment world. So, I guess those are my final thoughts.
Thanks, Matt. Jeff?
Yeah, I have to say that as an Australian coming at this with an incredibly limited knowledge of Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, this has opened my eyes to the impact this man had on generations of American children. Just what a generous, kind, beautiful soul the man had, and how he wanted to ensure that children were given the voice that they needed, but also the understanding they needed to deal with the world. Not just, he starts with their emotions, but he's also dealing with what they see in the world. Like, we can't hide the bigger things that happen in the world from our children, and he wanted to address that. And I think, like we said at the beginning, you start off feeling like a terrible human being because you can see how kind this man is. But by the end of it, you realise that there's places in there for you to adjust yourself to make you a kinder and better human being. So, I think in the sense of watching both these films, it can make me a better person.
Thanks, Jeff. And one of the final question that we ask ourselves is usually who won the rematch? I think that doesn't apply for this episode, to be honest. I think who wins a rematch is, Fred Rogers and the legacy he had, right? I mean, I don't know if anyone really wants to litigate, sort of like the feature over the documentary. I think they both have their place. I think they're remarkable, but, one man competing against himself, or the memory or otherwise. For me, at least, it doesn't make sense, but happy to hear thoughts from you gentlemen if you sort of had a preference of one over the other.
I wrote it was a tie. When I wrote my answer to the question, I just wrote this is a tie. That you can't pick one over the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. I think just to break it up a little bit, I think the documentary is better. However, I think that I've never watched them this close together before, and how well they serve each other as a viewing experience. It almost sort of took it out of like one versus the other, and more like this is almost a complete piece. One gives you sort of his whole story, and one kind of zooms in on how who he is affected individuals. So I'm with you guys. I don't think picking a winner doesn't make sense to me either.
That's great. Well, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Matt, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah.
Let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you guys for having me. It's been a blast.
No, thank you, Matt. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys.